Thank you, Michael. Hi, everyone. I think you know me already, but for the record, for the recording, I'm Grace Grothaus, and I'm very grateful to share this moment and the work that I've been developing over the past several years with you today. My dissertation is Perceiving Planetarity, Computation, Climate, and the Emergence of Envirographic Art. And in lieu of printing, the paper can be accessed digitally via this QR code. And I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement, recognizing that York University is located on the traditional and unceded territory of many indigenous nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Today, the area known as Takaranto is now covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant Treaty with the Mississaugas of the Credit and home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. As someone engaging with environmental concerns through my work, I recognize that Indigenous peoples have stewarded these lands for generations, and I commit to approaching my research with respect for the reciprocal relational responsibilities that Indigenous worldviews teach. The research questions underpinning my dissertation are the following. What are the links between the historical evolution of climatology and computational media practices? And can the rendering of ecological phenomena into sensory experiences through art serve as an empirical interface for learning about and responding to planetary scale challenges? And how does this approach manifest in my own research creation practice? Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. How's that? Okay, thank you. These research questions have led me to the realization that although the digital media has historically foregrounded computation, interactivity, and aesthetics, it has often marginalized practices with environmental imperatives. I have come to the conclusion that a new term is needed that can encompass the shared motivations, forms, and functions of the digital media practices which have long been addressing environmental issues and concerns. So I propose to introduce the term envirographic art to describe this evolving domain of data-driven digital media that mobilizes environmental and climate data as artistic material. This research reframes that trajectory by highlighting how computational media enables the rendering of ecological phenomena into sensory, embodied, and participatory experiences, often across disciplines, to create art that fosters dialogue, advocacy, and understanding. I believe that digital media is uniquely well suited to this task. For example, the medium's inherent systems, such as operating systems, bear a resemblance to environmental ecosystems. Additionally, digital media offers a sense of agency, allowing participants to engage with a world that responds coherently to their actions, mirroring the interaction with reality itself, but on a more condensed and temporal scale, which this encapsulation quality facilitates rapid transmission of narratives and the creation of meaning, transforming. I'm so sorry, I had a tech issue. Transforming the conventional, static, object-oriented nature of previous art forms and eroding the perceived separation between observer and observed. Lastly, computational media artworks systems enable author-user symbiosis through interactive engagement, offering a means of communication between participants, even across species, and it does so over potentially great distances in near real time. I'll begin by briefly situating envirographic art within the historical context of climatology's emergence and the evolution of computational media. Then I'll outline 3 core methods that structure this research creation inquiry. Finally, I'll present 6 artworks I developed from 2021 to today that exemplify envirographic art in practice, works that attempt to render complex planetary ecologies both legible and emotionally resonant. Introduction. Envirographic art intersects with domains of inquiry such as eco-art, new media art, and data visualization. Aspects of these movements are foundational for envirographic art, providing important ideas and methods used in envirographics, but without being synonymous with its aims. Boundaries between areas of inquiry are neither distinct nor clear-cut, but interconnected in the fluid nature of these genres engage with and examine similar interdeterminacies to ecosystems themselves. Introduction of this term is intended only as an inclusive articulation, verbalizing what has already been a long-standing research creation area, and not a rigid disciplinary boundary. As such, the following is an attempt to describe shared forms and methods, which include data translation, interdisciplinarity, mediated sensing, environmental advocacy, and critical engagement. What does envirographic art look like? Well, here are some examples. From top left to bottom right, they are Play by Spella Petrick, Rise by myself with Peter Sloan, Michael Pinsky's Pollution Pods, Natalie Jeremijenko's Robotic Dogs, the work of Terika Hapoja, such as Dialogue, Pigeon Blog by Beatrice da Costa, Studio Forma Fantasma's LiDAR Forest and Seeing the Wood for the Trees, Camilla Marambio's community work in Turbohole Hole Toll, and C+ Architectos' Yellow Dust. Envirographic art is both qualitative and quantitative. Unlike in scientific fields of inquiry, in which the use of data, observation, and evidence is used quantitatively, in envirographic art, it is also qualitatively used for the purpose of deepening the emotional resonance of an artwork. As climate activists are aware, facts alone do not sway many, but emotional connections do. And this is where envirographic art becomes especially powerful. Art goes beyond the mere visualization of environmental realities, such as a graph of CO2 rising levels, to generate transformative aesthetic experiences. Resulting perspective shifts can impact viewers, enabling greater connection with other species and with one another, perhaps even helping us to imagine alternate, more livable and thriving planetary futures for us all, because realizing change begins with our capacity to envision a different future. Context. I want to begin contextualization with the following quote by Spencer Weart. It was an extraordinary novelty in the development of human societies that climate change became a political question at all. Global warming was invisible, no more than a possibility, and not even a current possibility, but something predicted to emerge only after decades or more. The prediction was based on complex reasoning and data that only a scientist or artist could understand. It was a remarkable advance for humanity that such a thing could be a subject of widespread discussion. Computers have not only enhanced precision and accuracy of calculation, but have also ushered in entirely new ways of knowing about ourselves and our planet better. For this reason, the history of computing technology is inextricably interwoven with our comprehension of human and planetary systems, or planetarity. This section endeavors to give context to the emergence of that realization and trace that trajectory forward through computational art. My use of planetarity as a framework is taken primarily from the work of Spivak in her Death of a Discipline and the subsequent writings of Deepesh Chakrabarty, Ashal Mabimbe, and others, as well as Gaia theory from James Lovelock and the notion of holobiont from Lynn Margulis. A few of the earliest climatologists are Eunice Newton Foote, and she's recognized as the first woman in climate science due to her 1856 paper that theorized that changes in atmospheric carbon dioxide may potentially influence temperature. John Tyndall, who published similar findings a few years later in 1859, Svante Arrhenius, who first pointed to the combustion of fossil fuels as a driver in 1896, Guy Stewart Callendar, whose findings indicated that the Earth had already warmed, and this was in 1938, but he was dismissed. And not until 1955 was the first climate model created, and that was on a punch card system with only 5 kilobytes of RAM, which was the most advanced at the time, by Norman Phillips and his team. And this is because the climate system is too complex for the human mind to grasp with insight alone, or even analog calculation. No scientist managed to devise a page of equations that explained the global atmosphere's operations until the advent of digital computers. However, climate prediction remained elusive due to the incomplete Earth systems and climate data. Already by the 1960s, the race for data as we know it today was on. As computation increasingly swept through university labs from the mid-1950s onwards, It revolutionized the way researchers across all disciplines explored and comprehended our planet. Awareness was dawning about what these new climate systems models might mean to humanity writ large. This feverish time saw the creation and early defining of the fields of computer science, digital art, and climatology. It was also the era in which visionary JCR Licklider proposed the internet, Joseph Weizenbaum invented the first chatbot, Theodore Nelson coined the term hypermedia, also the years in which Hans Haacke exhibited living systems as artworks for the first time. Artists and engineers came together through EAT, Leonardo Journal was launched by Frank Malina, and art critic Jack Burnham gave voice to it all through his essay, System Aesthetics, in which he contended that culture was transitioning from an object orientation to a systems orientation. Even architecture was attempting to dissolve, as you can see in EAT's Pepsi Pavilion, which incorporated an artificial fog data visualization to blend the sky with the building. Artist and educator György Kepes at MIT held similar perspectives, describing recent shifts in art as dematerialization, similar to Burnham's unobject, through the use of light, which you can see here on the left. And on the right is an early example of envirographic art. This is an environmental data visualization at MoMA created by collective Pulsa, who used microphones, infrared sensors, and photocells to capture inputs like sound, light, movement, and heat, which they translated into responsive outputs. It had the effect of creating a continuously interactive space where natural elements and even visitors' body heat was triggering sensory responses. Both Kepes and Pulsa were motivated by a belief in the inseparability of humanity and built and natural environments. When in 1968, Bill Anders's iconic Earthrise appeared, this first full color photograph of Earth taken from lunar orbit created a momentous shift. There was a call in the earth sciences, art, and architecture to perceive life on Earth as a single integrated planetary system, emphasizing the interconnectedness between natural and human subsystems. Buckminster Fuller, inspired by this image, described our world as Spaceship Earth, our only home, and advocated for greater environmental stewardship. His alternative Dymaxion map, shown here, showed all of Earth's land masses connected in an attempt to shift our perspectives. He believed that we have been ignoring humanity's responsibility to care for the Earth, which he viewed as fragile and a unique life-affording bubble making its way along in an indifferent universe. By the mid-1970s, enough had been done to overcome climate knowledge gaps that Dr. Sukuro Manabe could make a breakthrough and accurately forecast future warming. His climate models proved to predict warming over the next 50 years with astonishing accuracy, eventually earning him a Nobel. And sadly, and with an immeasurable impact, actions were not taken at that time in response to his work. The 1970s ran a gamut of reactions to these rapid societal shifts, both from technophilia to technophobia. Some, like these shown here, were a blend of both. The Whole Earth catalog by Stuart Brand offered tools for back to the land living, as well as cutting-edge computers and cybernetic theory. Other emerging threads also worked across the perceived divides, such as hacking electronics to sonify plants, sometimes out of a belief that it could be used to highlight telepathic communication between plants and people. When in the United States, President Reagan took office in 1981, his administration aggressively deregulated protections. Environmentalists were demonized and climate science was partially defunded. Neoliberal logic preferred market-based solutions over regulation, reinforcing a belief that tech could solve ecological crises without changing underlying capitalist systems. However, resistance rose, laying the foundation for the environmental justice movement, including the notable 1991 First National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. And then internationally, scientists banded together across the artificial boundaries of nations to hold the Villach Conference in 1985, which declared global warming an imminent threat, the Toronto Conference in 1988, which called for reduction of emissions, and the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was also formed in 1988. The 1990s saw the continued harms of globalization through capitalism, alongside resistance from environmentalist artists and scientists. Climate reporting advanced with the IPCC's first assessment report, which confirmed human-driven warming and prompted international policy responses. And with growing access to environmental data, more envirographic artists began using it as a raw material, blending art, activism, and science. Eduardo Pack's essay concerning human understanding, shown here, exemplifies this. A canary in Kentucky and a philodendron plant in New York were linked via sensors, with the plant's response to the bird's songs over the internet triggering real-time MIDI sounds. Viewers influenced the system as well, creating a cybernetic feedback loop that revealed deep interconnection across distance. And the 1990s also saw the emergence of both telematics and net art. Kenneth Goldberg's Telematic Garden stands out among them. He created a web-based interface that let users remotely tend a garden via robotic arm. Participants planted seeds, adjusted water and light, and engaged in mediated interspecies care. Although some plants suffered under anonymous stewardship, most thrived. The system included a chat feature, fostering community and even friendship among telegardeners, some of whom arranged substitutes to water for the plants in their absence. This mechanically mediated experiment unexpectedly inspired nurturance and set a precedence for future human-machine species interactions. Both of these two artworks highlight some of the possibilities of remote connection afforded by the internet, which was still relatively new at the time. Humanity was growing in its worldwide connectivity, and artworks such as those showed some of the ways this could be positively expressed, even across species. I want to share the following quote by Jeremy Johnston, which talks about this growing planetary social imaginary. The planetary helps us to consider how, in the age of the Anthropocene, the human being is involved in a process of mutual becoming. We are becoming the more than human, as the more than human world is becoming us. This process of intensifying transparency between the social imaginary and the commingling agencies of the non-human world is the new uncanny reality of the planetary. We are being invited, and some might say initiated, to not only recognize but also creatively realize this way of knowing and being in our time. This slide traced the shift from the 1990s, in which climate change went from scientific hypothesis to a scientific consensus, while also highlighting the political inertia that delayed action. The Rio Earth Summit and Kyoto Protocol marked global recognition of the environmental crisis. By 1995, the IPCC's second report made a landmark declaration that human influence on the global climate was now discernible. But what's telling in the Google search data, you can see here. Public interest in the term global warming spiked in about 2007, coinciding with the release of the IPCC's fourth report and its warnings about runaway climate tipping points. And that's where we begin to see a major pivot from proving climate change to addressing it. This decade, the science moved past doubt, but the politics stayed behind. Arguably, it seems the world is largely still in the same stance today, which is deeply concerning. Because we're currently living through the sixth mass extinction, unfolding faster than any previous extinction event in Earth's history. This biodiversity crisis has deeply impacted contemporary art, prompting some envirographic artists to confront ecological losses. Philosopher Glenn Albrecht coined the term solastalgia to describe this emotional distress that we experience due to environmental changes already happening right now, while psychologists increasingly document rising global eco-anxiety, the fear of future ecological catastrophe. In response, artists like Jordan Bennett, with his work Skull Stories on the left, invite viewers to connect directly to memories embedded within animal skull sculptures, encouraging empathy and reflection on humanity's role and responsibilities towards non-human life. Similarly, Pinar Yoldas's installation on the right transforms environmental data into a visceral experience, sonifying species extinction through skull sculptures that respond dynamically to viewer presence. Both artworks invite us to consider our involvement and accountability in this unfolding crisis. In the 21st century, the thriving humanity is increasingly understood as inseparable from that of the more than human world, including other species and the geographies we inhabit. As Robin Wall Kimmerer puts it, all of our flourishing is mutual, but the converse is also true. This relational view is supported by contemporary science. For example, biologist Scott Gilbert's A Symbiotic View of Life argues that we've never been individuals, as over half the cells in our bodies are not human, but rather bacteria, fungi, and viruses that are constantly shifting in response to our environment. And Lynn Margulis echoes this with her term holobiont, an organism that is both individual and ecosystem. Writer Arthur Koestler extended this logic to humans and machines as well, emphasizing our embeddedness in technological systems of our own creation. Artist Gilberto Esparza's Plantas Nomadas, shown here, enacts this principle materially. His robotic sculptures integrate plants, microbes, and electronics together for the purpose of purifying polluted water and generating electricity. They function as living mobile systems of ecological remediation. And theorists like Donna Haraway call for tentacular thinking, highlighting interspecies entanglement and challenging nature-culture binaries. Many envirographic artists embrace this, centering plurality and relationality over singular global narratives. Terika Hapoja's dialogue on the left visualizes CO2 exchange between humans and trees, reconnecting art to living systems through real-time electronics. And Spello Petrik's play on the right explores interspecies play between plants and AI, blurring lines between human, machine, and vegetal life. As we surpass the 1.5 degrees threshold and face systemic instability, economic thinkers are calling for a great transition. And this would be a shift from exploitive systems towards degrowth, reciprocity, and solidarity. And art plays a pivotal role in this. As Kepis reminds us, the future cannot be predicted, but it can be invented. Framework. In this section, I'll outline the frameworks and methods behind envirographic art as I perceive them and my own practice. Using participatory, interdisciplinary, and data-driven lenses and key examples, I show how envirographic art can generate new ways of knowing about our environments. Traditionally, knowledge production has been framed as the domain of institutions, but citizen science, participatory action research, and co-creation challenge this hierarchy, viewing knowledge as collective and co-created. In envirographic art, these methods are crucial, as environmental crises affect communities unevenly and often invisibly. By involving publics as active participants, envirographic art can bridge divides between the expert and amateur, artist and scientist, and observer and observed, creating new embodied ways to sense, interpret, and address ecological challenges. Citizen science involves non-science directly in scientific activities through collecting, analyzing, or interpreting data to democratize knowledge, expand collection, and increase public engagement. Here are two examples. Pigeon Blog by Beatrice da Costa on the left uses pigeons with pollution sensing backpacks in Los Angeles to map air quality, highlighting environmental justice and reframing pigeons as symbolic allies. And in Feral Robotic Dogs by Natalie Jeremenjenko on the right, equipped toy robots are used as sensors, empowering citizens to detect hidden contaminants. This attempt at a playful method challenges official narratives, making environmental data accessible and actionable. PAR is a collaborative method which goes beyond where citizen science does. Here, researchers and communities jointly identify issues, collect data together, and implement solutions that they co-develop, empowering participants and creating actionable knowledge. Mel Chen's Funded project is a powerful PAR example, where he began by addressing lead poisoning in New Orleans, engaging participants to make colorful funded drawings as symbolic currency, raising awareness and advocating policy change, but ended up going to a national level and influenced federal lead remediation policies and regulation. Co-design is similar to PAR and involves collaborative processes where diverse groups generate knowledge, creative inputs, or solutions. It also highlights shared agency, mutual learning, and inclusive innovation. Camilla Marambio's Turba Toll Ho Toll, which was shown at the 2022 Venice Biennale, demonstrates the impact. This immersive installation amplified the Selknam people's fight to protect their peatland ecosystems in Tierra del Fuego. Combining co-created video, song, and scientific displays, the project advocated multi-perspectival, community-driven approaches to protecting peatlands' key sites for carbon sequestration. And historically, art and science have been treated as separate domains, institutionalized into distinct academic fields, yet earlier traditions like natural philosophy saw them as deeply interconnected. In the 20th century, critics like C.P. Snow called for reuniting these two cultures, echoed by visionaries like Kepis, who championed interdisciplinary work and called it interthinking or interseeing. Interdisciplinary collaboration is more than sharing tools. It creates entirely new knowledge. Artists and scientists together form hybrid methods, shaping new questions and insights. And Kepis's legacy lives on today at MIT. There, at the Center for Art, Science, and Technology, Tomas Saraceno and Marcus Buehler recently modeled and sonified a spider web for the first time. This sparked new art, scientific insights, several published papers, and is advancing 3D printing applications. In Heirloom, shown on the right, Gina Sarnecki and John Hunt grew living portraits from cultured cells, and the techniques they developed are now used in burn treatments. As theorist Ashal Mabimbe argues, reframing disciplines is essential for confronting today's global challenges and ensuring life sustainability. Crossing disciplinary lines enables new methods for understanding complex planetary issues like climate change and its impacts. Many forces shaping life on Earth are too vast, slow, or abstract for us to perceive directly. So scientific tools extend our senses, but crucially, they also mediate data. And we do this through translation into visual, auditory, or tactile forms. Envirographic art transforms invisible, complex data into forms we can sense through these tools, opening new ways of engaging with the world and how we know in an era of ecological uncertainty. David Green explains this power. He asks, from embodied cognition to embodied Earth, by making complex data sets sensible, what if we could extend our nerve endings and neural processes to include the whole Earth? What if our experience of the Earth could span geological time? If we experienced our planet as an extension of our body, might we treat it differently? In my own envirographic research creation, I enact nearly all these methods I've just discussed, while also developing my own strategies for making planetary transformations visceral, perceptible, and culturally resonant. I made this chart to highlight some of the trajectories of theory and praxis which are influential to my own practice. And reading is another important part of my process. I want to share a few of the titles that have been most present in my PhD studies in the frameworks that I'm drawing on, including Lynn Margulis's writing about symbionts, Donna Haraway's exploration of tentacularity, Timothy Morton's concept of hyperobjects, and Robin Wall Kimmerer's multi-species perspectives on agential being. These perspectives guide my artistic inquiry into how technological and cultural production interact with ecological systems, and how I invite audiences to consider the impact of human agency on planetary futures. I am also inspired by Benjamin Bratton and Jennifer Gabris, who situate computational systems within planetary scale ecocultural processes. And Linda Weintraub, Natalie Lovelace, and others shown here also inform my approach to how I approach the climate crisis as a complex systemic challenge requiring both speculative imagination and grounded interdisciplinary methodologies and data. This theoretical foundation is reflected in my practice's interdisciplinarity, which draws from art, science, technology, hybridity described by scholars like Stephen Wilson in information arts and Chris Salter in sensing machines. And underlying my practice are the following fundamental beliefs. Everything alive is intelligent. Plants are agential beings. All life on Earth is interconnected. All life processes, and many geophysical ones, are rhythmically periodic. They are dancing. Life on Earth at this moment is already post-natural. Nature and culture are no longer separate, if they ever were, and tools and technologies are humanity's interface with both. Mediation can be used to connect, not just attenuate, and art can reshape mental models, which I consider of vital importance as they form the frameworks that we live by. Now I'll introduce very briefly 6 artworks that I've created during this PhD time, the first of which is Holonic Chorus. This is a shared WebXR forest generated from real biometeorological data. Participants navigate using keyboard controls, triggering tones, which you can hear here, as they approach trees, each interaction forming a sort of song. It's viewable in any WebXR-enabled desktop browser like Edge or Chrome. The title draws from Kessler's notion of the holon, something that is both whole and part of a larger whole. Each participant creates tones individually, while together contributing to a collective chorus. Created during the pandemic, this piece reflects mediated connection, together yet apart. I'm grateful to my collaborators Kwame, Eyal, Douglas, and Kavi for creating this work with me. Holonic Chorus was built as a WebXR app using Node.js and 3.js. I led the artistic direction and developed the backend server with guidance from a course taught by Professor Graham Wakefield. Kwame was the lead programmer, Eyal added the tree meshes, and Kavi and I animated them with real wind data, and Douglas Gregory provided essential technical support throughout. This next artwork, Daily Chorus from 2022, abstractly visualizes Toronto as an interdependent ecosystem, attempting to connect built and natural environments and the geosphere, biosphere, atmosphere, and noosphere. The installation generates ambient sound, light, and projection, shaped by real-time atmospheric data and live tweets about Toronto. Viewers interact by walking through the gates and triggering responsive changes and becoming part of the ecosystem themselves. The work invites reflection on our connection to the urban meta-organism, which is our city, and our agency within its systems. It combines a 9-channel audio system, 4 projectors, and an installation of translucent acrylic gates lit by individually addressable LEDs. The light and sound was programmed in MaxMSP, animations were run through Unity, an overhead camera tracked visitor movement to enable the gate interactivity, and streaming environmental data shown on the right, including air particulates, light, wind speed, and temperature, inform the animation light and sound. I'm grateful to my collaborators, and here's an installation shot with Douglas Gregory walking through. And now Dawning. Dawning was created in 2023. Across the globe, living things respond to each new day in a beautiful and endless wave as the sun sweeps over the earth. Imagine positioning yourself outside of the earth and seeing that dawn is always happening. It's not just once a day. Dawning was created as a responsive installation in which I attempt an audiovisual celebratory meditation on this daily circadian rhythm of beings, which respond vocally to dawn, and an invitation to gallery visitors to join in the chorus themselves. I composed Dawning from field recordings of mine and modulated them in real time via streaming light, CO2 levels, particulate, temperature, and humidity data. These altered the video and sound playback, making the forest's invisible conditions audible and visible through fluctuations in sound levels, brightness, gamma, black level, and red channel. The artwork explores dawn as a slow rhythmic tide, forever arriving, but always different in how it breaks across each place and moment. Dawn brings a surge of audible life. Birds burst into song, monkeys howl, fish emit rhythmic clicks, and even trees register heightened bioelectrical activity, yet humans rarely join in on this chorus. Through this work, I wanted to offer an opportunity to rejoin that chorus through the microphone provided. And the audio composition also includes my voice and that of others as a gesture of participation, resonance, and ecological belonging. In the footage, I used abstraction to de-specify the location, and the visual textures I gravitated toward were atmospheric and the motion gently rocking, all to evoke emotion, inviting viewers to respond intuitively to the shifts in light, color, and shadow. This shows how dawning streaming data altered the video. On the right is a screen recording of the Touch Designer patch I built to apply these changes. And on the left, you see the live sensor data flowing into Touch Designer via the IoT platform, shifter.io, using sensors installed as part of Foresta Inclusive, the curator's framework. The video is projected into an overhead screen, which was made from rear projection film cut with a leaf canopy pattern. This allowed the light to both display the video and mimic dappled sunlight, casting leafy shadows on the gallery walls and floor. A large cushion invites visitors to rest beneath the screen and immerse themselves in a tree canopy light. And Sun Eaters from 2023 visualizes plant bioelectricity. It does that as light and vibration. So you can see at this installation at Toronto Botanical Garden and here on campus, which we can see after the Q&A, trees are equipped with prosthetic limbs. And these branches are embedded with LEDs, tiny vibration motors, and sensors that reveal each tree's unique bioelectric rhythms. At touch stations, visitors can hold these limbs, seeing pulses of light and feeling the vibrations that reflect the tree's shifting internal and environmental states. This turns an invisible biological process into something sensory and relational. I'm asking questions such as, if you feel a tree's heartbeat, does your perception of that tree change? Do you feel like you met the tree in a similar way to meeting a person and shaking hands with them? Sun Eaters was inspired by Dr. Suzanne Simard's research on how trees communicate and support one another through mycelial networks, a vision of community that gives me hope in the face of climate crisis and systemic collapse. In the studio, I adapted a human ECG circuit, the open source circuit that features an 808232 signal processing chip, to measure bioelectricity in plants instead of people, and found it works across the species. The code and more information about this is available in the paper's appendix. I created the prosthetic branches by first 3D scanning a real branch, sculpting the 3D model into 7 unique forms, slicing them into segments small enough for the Prusa printers here at York to print. And I want to thank Jacob Trolla from the Makerspace for sitting with the printers and reloading them. It was a big help. Celestial Objects in Aeriform Masses was also created in 2023, and it is a generative animation visualizing satellite data from Dr. Regina Lee's Nanosatellite Lab, which studies human-made space debris orbiting Earth. Her data set, gathered by a nanosatellite in near-Earth orbit, tracks growing accumulations of space trash. These are remnants from past missions and discarded satellites, and they now pose risks in our planet's upper atmosphere. I created this artwork as part of an interactive installation co-designed with Dr. Jolong and the Earth and Space Science students in Dr. Regina Lee's lab. This was shown at an exhibition you can see here, curated by Helen Gregory. For the animation, I used latitude, longitude, altitude, and pressure data to generate evolving colors and motion, inspired by the understanding of redshift and blue shift, which are tools astronomers use to map cosmic movement, whether or not stars are going away from us or coming toward us. I chose to approach the data set interpretively, evoking waves and rhythms that reflect atmospheric flux, stratospheric currents, and geomagnetic shifts. The goal was to explore the poetic and expressive possibilities within the data itself. And here's the Touch Designer program that I used to create it. And lastly, here's my airwear, Atmospheres 01. On the left is the first of these atmosphere wearables, also here. And these are an attempt to create visually striking critical art objects that sense and display air pollution, and it's part of a larger research creation project. This work focuses on fine particulate matter known as black carbon, which are particles 2.5 micrometers or smaller. They contribute significantly to global warming, as well as posing serious public health risks worldwide. This kind of particulate is a localized air pollution, but it can also be transported globally through the wind. It warms the earth by absorbing sunlight and heating the atmosphere. However, because it's short-lived, staying only for days to weeks, Climate researchers in the IPCC have posited that reducing it is one of the easiest ways to slow down global warming. You can't see black carbon particulate pollution in the air, which makes it even more important to visualize so that we can address it and curb it. This is the people who are involved with this larger research project, the team whom I'm immensely grateful to. It's a 2-year research project with 5 objectives. First, to develop a low-cost sensor which can isolate black carbon particulate. Current sensors on the market don't differentiate between other particulate types, which are not harmful. And to create wearables with these sensors that log that data onto a map with design input from Torontonians. To publish that website so that we can see what the air is like in our city. To hold public workshops and parades of the smart garments to raise awareness, and further knowledge dissemination through a short film and exhibitions. The data visualization of the first wearable is according to the 5 levels of EPA's Air Quality Index. Future wearables will display according to the 4 levels of the Canadian AQHI, while others will have screens that show the data numerically. I'm aiming for a parade of different communication styles welcoming to all. I can speak a little bit later in the Q&A to how the EPA's AQI and the Canadian AQHI are calculated and what the different levels mean. And the code for this display is also in the appendix section of my paper. Here are a couple images of the process of making it: the 3D model, the paper maquette, and early fabric prints. And on the right, the lung display while I iteratively prototyped its colors and breathing patterns. Immediate next steps include the continued design and production of the series of other wearable artworks and continuance of the other 4 objectives that I stated earlier, culminating in these public art events in which citizen scientists are invited to wear them and visibly reveal their lived experiences with black carbon air pollution. Also, I invite you to use the QR code here to sign a petition that the Bathurst Key neighborhood has just created this past weekend to call for long overdue regulation of ultrafine particulate air pollution. This is the first of its kind, and it originated right here in Toronto. I hope you take a moment to do that before I then move on to my final 3 slides of conclusion. Thank you. In conclusion, I'd like to highlight some current and emerging directions for envirographic art as I see it. First, envirographic artists have the opportunity, which is also a responsibility, to shape technologies in ways that foster ecological empathy rather than perpetuate extraction and exploitation. We can design tools to deepen our connection with environment and ecosystems. One particularly exciting area is the use of artificial intelligence to enhance interspecies communication. Machine learning is already being used to do this and opening new avenues for empathy, understanding, and ecological care through doing. Additionally, quantum computing may soon revolutionize how we think about computation. And quantum technology actually more accurately represents the way that reality works. So it's very interesting in that way as well. Ultimately, I believe envirographic artists can serve as crucial catalysts, imagining, prototyping, and advocating for regenerative ecological futures. Our creative practices can drive meaningful societal shifts. And lastly, future trajectories in my own practice include continued exploration of environmental sensing through building air quality awareness, expanding interspecies communication, visualizing soil and microbial health, and continued use of media to document precarious ecosystems. In closing, and with deep gratitude, I wish to thank the following. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Grace. So with that, we will turn to some questions. And to start us off, I invite Alice Murray from Concordia. Oh, I'm sorry, Alice, we can't hear you.
Apologies, I'm muted. Yeah. Okay. 1 second. I will just pull out my question because I think I have many questions, so I will choose wisely for two questions. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Grace, for this presentation. I think it's fascinating to present the planetarity as an ethos for thinking, making, sharing with humans, with more than humans, and how your process draws connections between the senses and slow and invisible phenomena and abstract phenomena between arts and science. And I'm quite fascinated by your research creation process and your six artworks, actually, and I want to know more because in the dissertation you present them sequentially, one after the other, and they're all effective examples of what you name envirographic art, actually, but they all present completely different modalities. So they're part of the same family, but they're all different. And you just presented it in a way like, okay, Holonet Chronos, you have 3D environments, daily chorus, you have immersive installation, the body, the city, Twitter feeds, data. In Dawning, you have responsive mediating projection. In Sun Eaters, you have plants, biodata, people using haptics, touching things, and so on. And you have celestial objects where we look at completely remote phenomena. And in My Airware, you use air quality data that you map in a more literal way to AQI. And I'm just wondering, like, if we look at those projects like transversely, not sequentially, what is common and what is different? And what are the methods and the operations that always come back for you in what you call envirographic art? And also, what is, I don't want to use the word effective because research creation is not about effectiveness, but what did you notice was the most powerful or maybe the most difficult in terms of public engagement?
What an awesome question. Thank you, Dr. Jerry. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak a little bit more about those connections and what drives the work. There's a lot there, so I'm gonna try to remember and address what you said sequentially. And please remind me if I missed a part that you'd like to hear more about.
Yeah.
I am someone who always has had a practice that's very exploratory. And so it's actually taken me a number of years to be able to arrive at a place where I can describe that succinctly. And the reason for that is that this mode of working in the world is actually how I understand the world. I'm just super overwhelmed with curiosity about a lot of questions all the time, always around our environment and how we relate to it, and how the things that we make are our interface for that, and how that interface is actually now overwhelming the world that they came out of. There's now more objects that are human made by mass on the globe, according to a study in 2019 that I read, than there are naturally occurring growing forms in terms of mass. And that's a weird shift that we're now encountering. And then through the work, it's also happening concurrently. So it's not sequential like you see in the presentation. For example, an earlier iteration of the experiments that led to the Sun Eaters version you see today started in 2019 and came with me when I arrived to the program, as well as the seeds of the ideas for the air pollution project and the early prototype, which I made in 2020 with the first display hooked up to an extant sensor, arriving here and realizing that I didn't have the tools with which to communicate what I thought was important, and coming to the realization that there was an opportunity to apply to create a team and being very excited. So that's been a very slow moving and evolving process that's ongoing right now, and I'll keep working on when I leave here, tomorrow and throughout the summer. So that's very exciting. I think the first three pieces that I made in my dissertation that you show here, you can really see a clear progression. I was really interested in how the air pollution led me to the realization that a lot of things in the atmosphere were invisible. It's full of life. There's microbes floating through it all the time, and they pass through our bodies, and that's crazy. And then there's things in physics like muons and other particles that are also passing through the earth. And even time and gravity is shifting in waves, and so we're not aware of it, but it can be measured. So that came to the point where I thought, okay, I want to focus on the living part of that and create work that discusses how we connect. And I used the sort of tool, if you will, of a chorus to try to describe those voices coming together, but still retaining their distinct, separate qualities. And so that featured first in holonic chorus, which is the first piece in which I used that tool as a communication about groups coming together. And then followed quickly by daily chorus. And then there's still a choral feature as well in dawning. And then you see that shift happening more towards trying to get the air pollution project foregrounded and the work that you do there, the exciting sort of side journey that I got to take with celestial objects and airborne masses, which was with Dr. Regina Lee, who introduced me to some of the researchers that I'm working on the air pollution project with, connections there. And then having the opportunity to more fully explore the bioelectricity in plants project, which I still feel like has lots of unanswered questions that I need to keep working with too.
Thank you. Can I ask a mini follow-up question, or maybe I keep it for my second round? I'm fine either. Or maybe another part of my question, Grace, was more in those different forms of engagement. How do you think the public perceive planetarity or engage with, if you compare those different artworks?
Oh, thank you. And I meant to say that as well and forgot. You said, what do you think are some of the outcomes that are important connecting all the pieces?
And also maybe the difficulties, because
and
we
the difficult
all,
and those two come together in the social interaction for me. So like what I found is absolutely the most rewarding and the most challenging is where the artwork intersects with the public. I get the most reward and excitement from when I am able to see how others outside of my practice view and understand what I put out and how that's different in exciting ways and sometimes overlaps, also exciting. But working with publics is super difficult for all the reasons that we all know, that every relationship's different and has its ups and downs. And so that for me is the most exciting and also most challenging part.
Great.
Thank you.
So we'll turn our time to Ian.
Sure. This is a question about success. So the simple question is what is successful or in Envirographic art? But there's a little bit. Part of it comes out of product Melchin's project, which there's some interesting aspects to it, like dynamics that like don't make it in there. Like there was like as many bills created to represent the amount of money paid.
Yes.
Driven
Huge help. Yeah.
Sure. I'm from theater. I can project. And it actually brought to mind his revival field, which I find really fascinating as something that looks at different types of systems, right? As a conceptual art piece, it aestheticizes like this one patch of brown with the concept that he's in paper accumulator plants and this integration of full metals on the ground. But you can look at it as a remediation project. You can look at it as a art project. You look at it as a remediation project because of its size. It's like, right? It does not remediate. Right? It does this little patch of it, but it's surrounded by it. And it's a great success, probably on the scientific research that went on for years. It didn't really make much out of the metal. Didn't get enough out of it. So thinking about like those sort of successes, when you're highlighting all of these sort of different works in the way that like how are you positioning them? How are you something described as successful?
That is an amazing question. I'm not sure I have all the answers to that. And I first want to speak a little bit about Melchen just for a moment, because yeah, I had the opportunity to hear him speak about his life's work, you know, at an overview instead of one specific project. And it was so impactful to me to see how he was someone who shifted from conceptual focus to very different media. So it was the concept that was driving the work. And if you looked at the different pieces, you would not readily see they were made by the same person. And I felt a lot of kinship with that mode of working, as well as some of the environmental aims and concerns, the social concerns that he had as well. And I think his practice is extremely successful. Like, it's had tremendous reach. I know for myself that I'll be making this work because it helps me grapple with the climate crisis, no matter what. So that in itself is a success. I will also do what I can to keep trying growing the reach. And part of growing the reach is responding to what I learn about from how people perceive the work, and then more closely aligning future pieces to have better, tighter communication, as I sort of any artist does, I think, and how I've experienced my own practice over the last 15 years. And it just gets better. You know, I get closer to that gap becomes less. So yeah, I'll try to keep striving for that success beyond myself of having greater reach, and to do so in a responsive way.
Are there common aspects or different areas of, like, looking at the areas, the environmental artistic?
I think I don't see it as a separation. I think that we really respond naturally to seeing things in the world because we become visually engaged with it. Like, the more bandwidth in our brain is focused on vision than it is on our other senses, and then it's followed, I think, by sound and et cetera, and touch. So we're already naturally wired to love art, and for me, making something beautiful is a way of attracting people to engage with the topic that I want to discuss. So I don't really see a separation between the content and the form. Yeah.
Great. I'm going to ask Mark up here, and I'm also going to move my chair. I'm going to ask the committee members to please come in closer to the owl. Okay. So I'm going to move. Yeah. Maybe.
And thank you, Ian. Just to say one more thing, Ian, I think that question's probably going to stay with me and be really fruitful. So thank you. Yeah.
Say that.
Yeah.
Here, response.
Yes. I just thank you for that question. I think that that's bringing up some ideas that I'll probably keep thinking through. And so it's going to be really fruitful. So thank you.
Ian pushes over one that I think.
Oh, nice.
Yes. Sorry. All right. Okay, you have a seat. All right, Mark. Yes, and if you could just project.
All right, I'll try.
Thank you.
So yeah, let me just say I enjoyed. So in a really broad sense, it's helping grasp the contribution. So my understanding was that basically you're defining a new term, place it in the historical context of all the previous work, or demonstrate that.
Mhm.
You say that.
Yeah, I found like there was a gap where a term was needed. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess where I was having a bit of trouble with it was in your artwork section, you have sort of related work. But I was struggling to find the connection between your work and some of the earlier things you emphasized. It's like, for example, you know, the thesis here, like private thesis you.
I can open that.
Yeah, if it helps you to reference it. There's a list of like key aspects that's on.
Mhm.
And on the next page, there's a list of art movements, genres.
Which chapter?
This is the first.
Okay.
So right in the introduction, come up with the lists. Well, I guess you don't have pages. It's the word base.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's your lists.
Of the different movements that intersect.
Concepts. You define it. So it might be too much to go into each artwork, but in a really broad sense, can you help me sort of connect those aspects that you list here with the works that you did?
Yes, and also maybe not as clearly as you might hope, because I think the way that my practice happens is that I'm learning and taking in a lot of information, and some point, and I'm not entirely sure why this happens, but I'll be like, that sparks an idea, and then I'll be like, I want to make that, and I'll think through that more, because this happens often. Is it one I'm actually going to invest in many months and all the resources that it takes to do? And then I'll think through that more and see if it really feels like it's got weight worth exploring, and if there's opportunities and it fits with the resources I have at the time. So I'm not someone who's like, okay, so I looked at Pulsa, and that now makes me think I should make this new artwork that's sort of coming out of that specifically, but rather reading broadly about the movement and the time period and the ideas that were shaping things. Sometimes even right now, like reading James Bridle's Ways of Being has been really helpful for me just in the last month. And then I last week wrote like 9 pages of artworks I want to make while reading that book. So, that's sort of how the process happens for me. But then after I make the art, it's easier to say, you know what, I'm picking up on that thread that was happening in this earlier artwork that I see there. I didn't make that explicit connection when I was having that creative brainstorm, if you will, or creative connection. But now I see that probably because I learned about that before, that's why that idea started to evolve in that direction. It's a little more organic than I can explain.
The
Nice.
process is organic. Maybe after the process, after it's created, people back.
Yes, okay. Yeah, would you like me to speak about any particular artwork or just all of them? Or
I mean, like even the concept of planetarity, which is kind of thesis, and you talk about that a lot in the introduction and then in the sections you define into the history.
Yeah.
But then, so how would any of your art?
I think, yeah, that's a unifying thread. So, like, let's take dawning, for example. The spark of creative inspiration that I had was like, what if I was positioned like the satellite, And this was after having a conversation about making art from satellite data, but before I actually got an opportunity to do that. So perhaps that's part of why that was. And I'd been reading about planetarity from Benjamin Bratton and Jennifer Gabris for years, as well as everybody else that I mentioned there. Newer people that I've been reading are like Arshile Mabimbe. His newest work is still in French, so I'm having to not getting a very good read of it, for example, but it's very exciting. So I'm like, okay, so let's be in the satellite facing Earth. This is a better perspective because this is not one that we have. This might help us see the world in a different way. Like dawn's not just happening to you, it's happening to all of us, and it's never static. It's actually just this wave sweeping over. And it was just so beautiful to me to think everything is responding to that. And why don't we also respond to that? I feel like I'm so disconnected. Why don't I just wake up naturally and sing a little bit to my dog when the sun's coming up? And then that's part of my daily rhythm, but it's not, I definitely got on a tangent, and I'm not sure that I am explaining that really clearly. Yeah, but then I think when trying to decide, okay, how am I going to visualize that artwork, for example, use that, I look at the tools and techniques that I've learned about from past movements, and I think interactivity is a great way that I can engage people. Why not actually give them the opportunity to join singing? And then video gives me an opportunity to both record a moment and live update that. And that live updating of the weather points to how that recorded moment of the ecosystem, how it is now in the Holocene, where it's pretty easy for the organisms in it to have a homeostasis. That's vanishing. And so that live updated weather points to how maybe 50 years from now, that ecosystem will look really, really different and be a lot harder for the organisms to live in it because of that wildly shifting weather that we're predicted to experience in potentially very different climate conditions from what those beings evolved in. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Joel, and Joel, if I can just ask you to project, and also it's just that Alice is still having a little bit of trouble hearing some of the questions.
Okay,
Great, thank you.
is this okay? I'm right in
Yeah.
front of it, so I
Yeah, I hope that'll be the case. Yeah.
Okay, so wow, we're here. Right. I really want to congratulate you, Grace, on like this amazing journey that you've had. You know, I remember like years ago, you know, when we were having conversations and you know, ended up showing in similar shows as well, and how I was really taken by the depth of how invested you are in your project and the ability to translate some of this real emotional depth and experience within the artworks itself. What I do see here is, you know, this proposal for envirographic research, you know, as a kind of umbrella term for a lot of different artworks that you mentioned here, you know, and your kind of opus as an exemplary part of this possibly new movement, new groundbreaking movement. So in that sense, the kinds of questions about success and kinds of questions about connection, you know, to the general ideas, I see it as somewhat perspective, hopeful, you know, very optimistic, in order to align with some of the broader goals of this umbrella term that you've defined. I want to say that the dissertation is kind of, in terms of tone, it is very optimistic. You know, you mentioned Timothy Morton and there's hyperobjects and then dark ecologies up there. And you mentioned actual Mbembe, and you talk about, you know, connections and everything. And then there's the undercurrent of necropolitics and the biopolitics that's, you know, that social cultural systems are inflicting essentially on marginalized groups. And, you know, I'm not questioning its absence, but I'm interested in that process of transducing or transforming grief into optimism. And I know that in your project, you know, your conclusion, you say things like, when needed, I adapt existing systems. When possible, I build new ones. When joyful, I invite others in. But this iterative process of prototyping, testing, failing, and refining often leaves few visible traces in the final output. And so with this question, I really want to value like all the work that you've done, failing, right? And picking yourself up after that. And so I'm just asking whether there is a moral guideline that emerges from this translation of grief to optimism that may be, you know, that may be the undercurrent for this new envirographic art.
There's so much there. Thank you. First of all, thanks for the congratulations and the acknowledgement of all the work. Some of it that goes unseen, you know, projects that get started but never get finished due to a variety of reasons. All of that, I appreciate that acknowledgement. That means a lot. You know, my work in my master's was a lot less hopeful. I was angry about the climate crisis and wanting and needing to express that anger through the artwork with pieces like a hourglass that was counterbalanced with a microphone over a speaker. And so as the hourglass, as the time ran out, the microphone came closer to the speaker and created this horrible screeching feedback loop. And it was just painful to experience because that was how I felt like the time was running out, right? But through the process of making a few works like that, that really sat with the discomfort and tried to expand that outward to others, I felt like this was a misspent time, because what emotion do I have when I'm confronted with that sense of despair? non-action. So that's not a good place from which I can leave my audience in a perspective where they feel they have agency to join in the fight. And so there began to be a shift more towards recording and hopeful perspectives. First with things like the biodiversity work in Against Our Better Nature. And then the pandemic locked us down. And that was at the time I was already thinking I really should have more of a hopeful perspective in the work. The work was becoming more hopeful for that reason, but that crystallizes it. For me, was like, I'm not going to contribute any more negativity through my work. There's enough out there. And that's the stance that I've continued to hold for this past 5 years and where I'm at right now. So even though the work is very optimistic and the writing in this is very optimistic, and that tone is really different than the tone that I put forward in my master's thesis, I think it for me is the honest best place for me to write from. It doesn't not acknowledge the difficulties. In fact, I think it's harder to know about all those species that are disappearing and the people whose land is actually going to be erased through the rising ocean, and still put forward hopeful work. It's hard to do, but it's the work that I want to try to do for others, because that's how I perceive I can be of most value with my practice. I'm sorry the screen went dark and it went to sleep, so I can bring that section up from the chapter where you were discussing, if you like, or reference another part.
I'm good for it. Thank you.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Mark Hayden.
Okay, I also want to echo those sentiments. Actually, a really amazing document on depth, the history of climate change, growing parallel. To dive in more on this, one of the kind of tensions you mentioned in this briefly was that this cultural tension between art and science. There's also so I'm curious about that, but I'm even more curious about this tension between technology, environmentalism, the idea of making this idea of, I guess, a field, or defining this field, or doing work in this field that uses digital tools to address environmental impact. And like one of the things that popped out at me is at the end you mentioned AI, and again, like you were saying, this like positive aspect, like how it could facilitate interspecies communication, partner empathy. But AI is also kind of criticized. It's hard and now and then it takes just to be simple queries. It's having very measurable impacts on Earth. So, is there all of it that includes it? And how do you square that?
Thank you for asking that. It's really important. And I think that tension actually drove what felt like an urgency to actually kind of learn more about the history and feel like a term was needed, because there were a lot of artists that had been for a long time working in that way, addressing environmental issues through mediated technology. But, and this is discussed more in the paper, but a little bit less in the presentation, a lot of environmentalists hold a different perspective, where they believe that using less technology is the answer, and could sometimes perhaps even criticize that attempt to do that work in a technological and mediated way. And there's certainly a huge impact of particularly rare earth mining. I do think that it's important to remember some things, though, that the practice I have recycles tools. And so that lessens the impact. And also that every field has a huge impact. I recently learned that the New York Ballet alone spends $1 million on ballet shoes. They often don't they get worn for one performance. And so they have to be made from silk and they have to be made from wood based on the traditions of that field. And so silkworms have to be farmed, do this labor of producing silk. It's spun, made into fabric. Trees have to be grown, then they cut them down. They fabricate this shoe. It gets worn for one beautiful performance, this expression of our creative potential as a species, and then it's discarded. So there's a lot to grapple with in every field and where we don't have answers, and I definitely don't have answers. So I have a main tenet that I live by, that I don't waste, and I reuse everywhere that I can. But there's still an impact, and I want to acknowledge that. So I have a section in the beginning of the paper. I wish that this display had not gone to sleep. I'm having trouble bringing it back up, so I'm sorry about that. That I would like to point to, but you can read that in the dissertation on your phone. It talks a little bit about that impact and how digital media is not exempt from any, as is any field, from trying to figure out how we can use less and weigh a little bit less upon the earth that we get to draw from. AI in particular is computation heavy. And so that's a weird balance because we're now being able to, I say we, but it's not my field. The field of science is able to now use huge data sets of whale songs and discover that because they're so complex, there's a language. And this blows my mind and I get so excited, and we might, as people who are reading about popular science, get to learn what whale language is like, which might help us see that it's really important not to pollute their space and see them go extinct, because as large mammals, they're among the most precarious. But the impact of just doing that research is pretty heavy. So I think that points again towards the circular problem of greening our power grid. It's clear that we don't have a way now to do that just yet, but we're in an energy transition trying to do that as fast as possible. And hopefully my practice can move along towards that as it goes. I try to use solar power where I can with works like, not the current installation of sun eaters that you'll see here, but often sun eaters is installed with solar panels that provide the power for it and things like that. So.
Is it your position then that technology help us resolve it?
That's a huge tenet to lay on any field. I think I would not make that statement. I would say that imagining different ways of doing things is how we solve problems. And art definitely helps us imagine. So art has a big role to play. And that's what I say in the paper. But whether, I don't think that I could say that art's going to save the world. No.
Great, thank you. Well, that completes the, excuse me, the first round of questions. So maybe we can take a quick stretch break while we're getting the screen back. And Alice, we'll return to you for another question.
Perfect.
So, yeah, let's just all of us stand up for a moment.
Sorry about that.
Good.
Yeah, I got it back on PC2, but it just didn't appear for some reason.
Michael,
Yes, Alice.
do I have time to grab a glass of water?
Yes, you do.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, maybe we'll take 5 minutes. Yeah, let's just take 5 minutes.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I think I'll get some water too.
You can't hear me?
I'm fine.
What if we just kick open the door and then I'll turn it down and off? Does that sound good?
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate you coming. Thanks, I appreciate it. There's the installation of the branches that we'll look at in a little while, but don't stick around for that.
information person.
I appreciate it. Okay. Yeah. For sure. Okay, take care. Thank you.
Oh. So I am.
What time is it? Okay, we'll finish then. Thank you for that really inspiring question, Dr. Alistieri, and the opportunity to talk a little bit more about that. I do speak a little bit to it, but I think it really only comes to the foreground in the paper, in the artwork section, talking about celestial objects and aeriform masses, and also the final project. And the reason for that is that I don't always get the opportunity, actually. So in my master's, where I went to the UC San Diego, that was the first time in which I had the opportunity to invite scientists into my studio and have really exciting conversations and get inspired to learn that there are actually practices that work in that way. And what I found was that the practices that were most exciting to me, the ones that I featured here in particular, Tomas Saraceno with Marcus Buehler and Gina Sarnecki with John Hunt, were ones in which they were mutually entangled. I don't know that there's a better way to describe it, but it wasn't just data visualization of a scientific data set, but co-creating together. But that doesn't always happen, and it's not something that can happen quickly. Often you have to develop relationships over time. So what I did beginning in my master's was to ask our scientists, can we have more conversations? And then later seeing, okay, I have an artwork idea. I do need some data for that. So although the artworks would go far beyond just an illustration of a simple data set, using the data set as a point of departure, such as works like RISE, that was a big key feature, was saying, okay, I'm working with the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. They have a 40-year archive of holophone recordings across the ocean. And these show places where the ocean's very lively, as well as the Gulf of Mexico, where that's sort of like what potentially could be the future spreading across other places. It's a very dead ocean. There's not much complex large mammal life there anymore. And then I moved to here, and you have to restart. You have to move to a new place. You need to listen and rebuild relationships. The environment here is a little different with a sort of commuter campus and a lack of studio. So I learned to have conversations, meeting scientists and engineers in their labs, and also to do a lot more over Zoom. And then now I've got invited to do, first celestial objects, in which there was some co-creation happening there. The interactive installation on the wall there was made by science students and myself. We've met and we iteratively designed how that would take place, and then built it together and installed it together, and that was really exciting. And then people that I met through that led to the opportunity to expand this project with the NFRF that you talk about, my airware and atmospheres. I just want to pull up a picture of some of the team members here. Yeah, so I think in my mind, I see the highest goal being working so closely together that you have that sort of innovative development that happens in a mixed way across both fields. But that's really hard to achieve, and so sometimes it's more about falling short of that and instead learning from one another, but still being falling back to your own expertise and working out of your own expertise in different components that you bring together in a group project way. So the way I see it, I guess, in my own practice is, since I've only been doing this type of work for a few years, I have so much time ahead of me to get better at that, and potentially so many more opportunities to do that type of deep collaborative work that I hope to continue to do. I don't know if I fully answered any key aspects of your question. If you wanted to reframe something that
No, that's super interesting. I mean, I would have 10,000 follow-up questions, but I don't want to take too much time, and hopefully we can discuss another moment. I'll be happy
thank
to
you
do
so
so.
much.
Great, thank you. So Ian, thanks. All right. This actually, I feel like this came, some of this, there's a thread. I noticed it in Joel's question. Continuing down the line, there's a little bit there, and this is sort of on dealing with loss and absence. Especially because you bring up nostalgia, and the way that you define it, that's it's defined. There's an aspect to it that's sort of like the way that Albert described the catchphrase for it. Alternative to it is homesickness without leaving home, which I think if someone weren't familiar with it, that solid definition that you have adds a different dimension to it, because it's the idea, or where it came from, is the research I was doing in Perth around people who are watching the climate sort of change around them, so they weren't moving, but felt like they were leaving than they had before. And so have that sort of, not just grief, but that sort of nostalgia for a place that had been, but that they couldn't return to, without having actually changed anything to. So there's there's an interesting nuance there. And so, and because it lines up with the sixth extension in your writing, I'm wondering about, or I was curious, is a lot of, and it might just be a factor of right now we're just trying to make systems or your visible, or things that people otherwise can't see. They're visualizing things that are otherwise outside of standard human sensorium. But then I would have this question more about how it can then address the absences, because these are key topics and strands in which in what they're trying to address. That I'm own climate grief, but this idea of soul nostalgia, or the absence of a species. It gets to a little bit. I'm forgetting the title right now, but with the trees, because you're adding an additional link onto it. So it starts to get, it starts to approach it there. But why don't you talk a little bit about not just
making things that we can't see visible, but helping to articulate the loss, that it seems to be an important theme that's pushing your work.
I think you're correctly identifying what is an important theme for me. I think in trying to foreground hope these past few years, I'm putting that sense of loss and disconnection a little bit lower in the hierarchy of what I'm trying to communicate to the viewer, but it's still really present because I guess it's just really core for me. And part of that might be sort of biographical, like growing up near the Blue Ridge and going hiking nearly every weekend. And on sporadic trips home, seeing that it is different, which is a little bit more akin to that formal definition of soul nostalgia. But I think what I tend to feel more is actually what psychologists are calling eco-anxiety, where I'm like, I'm looking at this data and I'm feeling like by the time I'm old, the world's going to be in a really different place. Sorry. Yeah, so I try not to put that forward in the work as the first note, but instead focus on what it is we can do. So I think in terms of what's missing, my instinct often goes to recording. And I think that comes back to those positive possibilities that mediation affords. Of course, we've been doing that with media since it first appeared, and then we've been grappling with what that means and the veracity of it as well, right? Photographs were so exciting, but then how truthy were they, right? But video, especially this, what I'm calling envirographic video that's live and modulated with the real-time data, I think it's really powerful, at least in my mind, of offering both that recording as well as pointing to that lack of static and also very precarious future-facing aspect. And I never thought about Sun Eaters as being a phantom limb, but that's an exciting thought that you're kind of putting up forward in my mind, and maybe that's something that I'll play with. I think it's interesting. Yeah, thank you for noticing that thread and asking the question.
Thank you.
Great, Mark.
Yeah, so up towards the owl so that it helps to hear me, but I guess this is really another thesis structural question. So I found that your conclusions were very future focused, which is good in itself. Maybe this is an art science difference, but with chapter 10, you reflect on the research creation methodology. So it's very process oriented, sort of how I develop these artworks. But what I thought was missing was just like conclusions, like what did you actually conclude from this work? And I kind of thought that chapter 10 could have almost been a conclusions section, and it sort of does describe what comes out of it.
Yeah.
Describe the process. But I maybe you could like quickly summarize. In the abstract, you hinted sort of findings,
Yeah.
but I didn't quite grasp directly what the findings were. Conclusion or take home. Summarize that.
Maybe some more work needs to be done there too, but I do think that I tend to see, that's interesting you're bringing it up. And I'm thinking maybe that points towards some revisions that could be helpful, you know, to sort of improving the paper. But I'm thinking that perhaps that might be coming up a little bit because I see my field and have been taught maybe that my field is a open-ended one. So it's because of that qualitative focus that art has rather than the quantitative, and maybe less geared towards saying this concludes us, you know, whether or not this was a success or not, or this proves or indicates. I think what it proves or indicates for me that I was mentioning in the abstract was that this has been a real solid area that sits between some of environmentalists that are particularly using mediation, that's those sensing capacities that you can't get any other way than using electronics to extend our senses, and how that's important. So I think I'm saying the finding is that, yeah, this is fruitful, and I'm excited, and I'm thinking that this will continue to grow in relevance and importance, and the dialogue might grow as well in the time that we have moving forward. So maybe just saying that a little bit more explicitly could be good. I don't want to, I guess, in particular, say whether or not I thought an artwork had X result, basically, I guess. Because I learn something new, I guess, each time I install it, in a way. Like Sun Eaters, which I'm excited to walk you guys over after our conversation ends here. That'll be the third time that this iteration of it's been installed, and each time, and in each place, it has a different resonance for me. And I think that's one of the wonderful things that art can do. Yeah.
You don't want to finalize it.
Yeah, I don't want to lock it down too much. Yeah. My conclusions for it may be different than others, what others draw too, and I want to leave space for listening to their perspective.
Okay. Yeah, similarly, I have some questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark. Joel. Okay. Also, like, trying to orientate a bit. Again, just a comment on the dissertation and how now I really appreciate its breadth. Again, as Mark David mentioned, this is really an amazing historiographic account of some of the themes that you're interested in. But I also think that it's like a I would say almost like a fearless kind of approach at all the different topics that you are going to explore in the rest of your career, which the solid kind of connected threads for you to develop into pedagogical tools, into workshops, into future artwork. So this is fantastic as a template for your future endeavors. Congratulations. I do want to focus on one of the chapters, and there are a lot of themes which come in, and I go like, oh, I would have loved to read out a little bit more about it, but then I'm kind of going, well, maybe there's no scope for that within this particular dissertation. Again, hope to hear about those in the future, but in particular the chapter on technophilia and technophobia, and I really appreciate you going into the Cold War and thinking about a political structure around the phobia aspect of things, technocratic solutions, and how people are have that kind of emotion towards that. But I'm also interested in how your works are responding maybe to a more current kind of issue around data practices, which are becoming more opaque and more infrastructural. So it's not so much like something is there that we are reacting violently against, but it's more about the notion of invisibility and visibility, right? So how I know it's in there somewhere, right? So how would you say or articulate your works are responding to the kind of current issues of surveillance, misinformation, mistrust of technology?
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, I don't know if I have a sense of like mistrust that feels strong, but I feel I have a sense of concern about the fact that our air quality is officially monitored only at these sporadic stations. That's the way it's done. And black carbon particulate points to the fact that that means we have incomplete data from my perspective, because it plumes up in these short bursts. Like the Bathurst Key neighborhood, every time that the airport has a takeoff or a landing, it spikes and then it wafts if the wind's going the right way to their neighborhood. And they're having these huge impacts. And so even though the AQHI for the day might show the city is pretty good because the monitoring station, I'm not exactly sure where those are positioned, shows it's pretty good, it's not good for people living right there. And they're also sandwiched with the Gardner and the rush hour traffic that comes from that too, and the construction slowing that down and making it worse. So I really want to push back, I guess is a better word than mistrust, by using the low cost, easily distributed capacities that latent electronics have, and by putting those in the hands of as many people as possible so they can add to the conversation and update that so that maybe we can go bottom up and top down instead of just top down. So I guess I try to come from the perspective that people are good actors rather than bad actors. I think bad acting sometimes comes from inattention more than it comes from nefariousness. But bad action is always possible across the board. And so by getting data in the hands of more people and having that conversation more often, we go a long way towards accountability. So that's important. I think this project foregrounds that more than some of the others, which are a bit less social critical and a bit more about inviting a sense of wonder and connection.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree. I think, you know, speaking as a colleague, like we're all invested in this era, this epoch where we're gonna need to contend that open source is not really open source.
Yeah.
And we need to really understand what the underlying structures and how data is organized and streamed, monetized, what the funding structures are for large open source networks. You know, we mentioned whale songs at the start, and something like Ocean Networks Canada, for instance, that has like billions of data points. You know, they have a significant interest from petrochemical. So there's like an irony over there that needs to be visualized as well. So, you know, not to take away from the optimism of the dissertation, but I think this is a work that we collectively.
But it's part of the optimism, like that we could contribute to that narrative and offer that pushback, that these can give us the tools by which to do that. I think that's where that optimism comes from.
I think that some of the methodologies and community-centered approaches and consultative practices that you talk about are going to be really important in defining how this data is used.
I think so too. Thank you for pointing that out. And as let's not forget, like NOAA and NASA's Earth systems programs were begun out of these post-World War II attempts to refund from the war efforts and to potentially use for tech for war. That's how we got advanced satellites that could detect climate change. That's how we got meteorology, climatology as we know it. So we can't, as interested citizens like me, be complacent in that knowledge, I guess. How can we add to and hold accountable? Yeah.
Or it could just become infrastructure of some sort of business.
That's a good point too. Yeah. Thank you.
Great, Mark Hayden. Okay. Anyway, I guess I get to ask the last question. Actually wanted to use this as an opportunity to provoke you a little bit. And actually it kind of, again, trails off a similar sentiment that Joel was talking about. And so, like, for example, in the previous question about technology, I mean, I would argue you're kind of skirted the issue of taking a stand on the, you know, can technology save us? Can it not? And, you know, there's a very like passionate debate there to be had. And then also like with Mark's question, you know, wanting to leave the works open-ended, you know, not finding a result, but or a place where they land. So, and you have obvious passion and urgency around this issue. And I think if you think of the dissertation as an extension of your work, that it's an opportunity actually for a call to arms and how this work can be spread and taken up by others. And through that kind of framing, you know, I wonder, because it's not entirely clear to me, do you propose that envirographic art as a replicable framework? And if so, how might that be adopted by other artists or researchers working in different contexts?
Thank you very much. I first want to respond with your call to provoke, a call to arms with a perspective that I hold, that I've shaped over years of thinking, that it's important to avoid black and white thinking. So activism for me is not saying here, right here, and pointing a finger in someone's face and saying, I have the answers and this is how we need to do it. activism to me is so much more pluralistic and needs to involve conversation. So that's when I say top down, bottom up, meeting in the middle, instead of saying overthrow the top down. We just need bottom up structures. I think that's just really important because I just don't align myself, I guess, with the black and white thinking of some calls to arms. So I do actively avoid that. And I think you see that time and again in the paper, and maybe also in the framing of the envirographic art overall, actually, is like, I'm pulling from here and I'm pulling from here because I see people who are using those tools from these, what some people consider disparate areas in a really useful way that's super exciting because it does something that each area alone can't. And then that discussion of technophilia and technophobia, trying to highlight that it's not just these people were technophobic in this art movement, these people were technophilic, but rather that the conversation is a lot more complicated than that. I guess sometimes when I read historical accounts or calls to arms, I feel disappointed in the singularity of the narrative, in the simple way that the information is presented. So that complexity, though, can lead to a difficult task. And I think that's why the chapters in this dissertation number 18 and not 8, and why there's so much information and so much work I needed to do in the context to answer those questions. But I do think it is a replicable framework. And that I think I'm showing through not just a description of what that area is and earlier practitioners, but also those methods. So someone who is new coming to this, who wanted to engage with it, can say, ah, I see the frameworks that you're pointing towards. I see the methods that I can very practically employ. I too can make envirographic art. And I think that there's a lot of room for everyone to do it differently. An air sensor is just an air sensor, but what you do with it is the art. And I want to see 100 voices doing it way better than me. I can't wait. It's going to be awesome. That's my call to arms, I guess.
I guess my follow-up provocation is that an idea of like pluralistic approach to activism that avoids dichotomies, I guess,
Thank you.
is actually quite radical. And if you think about like the way the world is dividing itself up nowadays, that's not happening. And that could be actually pushed as a call to arms itself.
Oh, thank you.
And so anyway, that's one I align with in my own life. And so anyway, I guess I'll leave it there.
Wow, Mark David, thank you. I think that is something that a way I could frame it as a call to arms. That would be exciting and feel, genuine for me. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for all of those questions. I don't know if anyone in the committee has anything else they want to ask or add. Okay, not at this time. Great. All right then. Well, then what we're going to do is the committee is going to take some time to convene. So I'm going to ask Grace and our audience to leave the room. I think we'll be at least 15, 20 minutes, but we still need you to stay close, just so that when we're finished with our discussion, we can invite you back into the room. For those of you still on Zoom, I'm going to move you into a waiting room. I'm also going to stop the recording. Okay. Great. All right. So I'll invite all of you to, we'll let you know when we're welcome back.
I can invite you all to wear this if you like out in the hall. So I'll bring it out with us.